All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cheyenne's Forum. Today is December 5th, and thank you so much for Tom to come to our forum again to discuss some very important issue with us. Tom, welcome again.
Thank you, Cheyenne. My pleasure.
Thank you. And we got a lot of good feedback about our last interview, and then some people just have some questions. Maybe we can answer the questions during today's program. And for today, I'd like to discuss two topics with Tom. First is about Officer Chauvin, Derek Chauvin. And we all know his story, what happened about him. The newest information we got is he was sent back to the prison that he got hurt after he not fully recovered, mainly recovered from the hospital, and then he was sent back to the prison. I have some questions regarding this news. And the second is about the international organizations. You see the picture behind me is UN. The topic I want to discuss with Tom is the purpose and the reality of the international organizations. So we know when and where they start and what their purpose at that time. And now we see something might changed. The direction is kind of different. So that's why we want to discuss with Tom about what your point of view about the international organizations like UN, WHO, WTO, Interpol, and so on. And people have seen these organizations have played a very important role in some trend. So we'll talk about that. What is that? And then we can discuss with our audience as well.
Okay.
So the first question is about Officer Derek Chauvin. And people know what happened with him. He was hurt. The guy stabbed him 22 times. And then he was sent to the hospital. And then, thank God, he survived, which is very good news. And then today we just see the news that he was sent back to the prison. So my question is that regular practice? Because the parents, I think his mom, told the press that they did not hear anything from the prison, that they changed something to help to prevent him from harming again. So why they just send him back to the previous prison? So I just want to ask Tom, because I know you used to work in the police station and the law enforcement, of course. Is that normal, or
Well,
is
the FBI is a completely separate agency from the Bureau of Prisons. So the Bureau of Prisons control themselves. They decide where prisoners are housed, which jail they get sent to, their procedures for controlling the prisoners and who goes where within the prison system, who gets put in solitary confinement or in special lockup situations to protect them. And, so I'm not familiar and did not deal with the Bureau of Prisons on those kind of decisions. They were on their own, and it was not subject to the scrutiny of the FBI or the prosecutors or any of that. They decide where they want to do all of that. So, they sometimes will make decisions based on what would be convenient for the prisoner family to be able to visit the prisoner in jail. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. I don't know the rationale of how they make those decisions, or in the case of Chauvin, why exactly they decided to send him back to the same jail.
But to us, as regular people, we just thought, okay, it was very dangerous for him. And it is very dangerous for him right now. Nothing changed. And also,
the one thing that would change is the location of the person that tried to kill him. So if that person is in a different jail, maybe that's very safe for him to be there. I don't know, but we don't know. We don't know what the rationale was, or whether Bureau of Prisons even feels inclined to explain why they made that decision.
Sure. The case is drew a lot of attention nationwide. I think one of the reasons is because we have some new evidence that shows maybe Officer Chauvin is innocent. That's why people pay close attention to this case. So we think about the trial that he got, but lots of people thought the trial is not very fair. So do you think that if he can open his case again, can he got a fair trial next time?
It's a good question, because at the time when he was getting ready to be prosecuted, his attorneys made a motion to the judge that the venue should be, at the minimum, the venue should be changed. In other words, don't try him in Minneapolis, where, you know, the whole city hates him and feels that the destruction was his fault, and the riots that occurred after the Floyd death was his fault. And therefore, the attorneys felt that his trial should be moved somewhere else to try to find a jury that might be more objective. Now, that happened, if you recall, the Oklahoma City bombing case. Timothy McVeigh, when they were ready to prosecute him for that case, the venue was changed. Instead of Oklahoma City, the trial took place in Denver. So you have a jury being selected from residents or citizens of Denver, as opposed to Oklahoma City, where emotions would be much higher and you know, it would be more raw to do that prosecution there. So in the case of Chauvin, his attorneys wanted a different venue that was declined. They also wanted a jury that was sequestered, which means that they're not supposed to hear the news and read the newspapers, all of that, also denied. So basically, the trial went forward in Minneapolis. And one of the reasons for the desire for the defense attorneys for a change of venue was the jurors, as they went to the courthouse every day, were driven past buildings that were burned out and destroyed. Big parts of Minneapolis were gone. And the jury saw that every single day. And the defense position was, especially toward the end of the trial, is that there were some discrepancies about where was Chauvin's knee. If his knee was on George Floyd's neck, which they tended to believe is what happened, then they could say it's manslaughter. He didn't have to put his knee there. He helped contribute to Chauvin's death. Meantime, the blood work showed that an extremely high amount of fentanyl was in his system. And that Chauvin did not have his knee on his neck to cut off breathing or make it hard for him to breathe. His knee was actually on
the shoulder,
the shoulder blade, on his back, over to the side on the shoulder blade, not up on the neck. And so that was a matter of dispute of where it was and how it was and all of that. But in any event, the defense attorneys felt that it was unfair to have the jury try to decide his guilt or innocence, because in that situation, in that city where they saw all of the damage and could hear the news reports that were predicting that if this jury found him not guilty, the riots would continue all over again. And
so
if the jurors, pardon?
It's a kind of threatened.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
it was intimidation of the jury that you better find him guilty, because if you don't, we're going to burn the rest of the city down, and it's going to be your fault. So that was a big issue. And again, the judge refused to allow it. So the jury saw the damage. The jury heard the threats. The jury heard the news reports of what would happen if Chauvin was found to be innocent, or the ruling was innocent. And they were afraid of it. The other issue was the jury was not anonymous. Now, in the federal system, in organized crime, I ran the organized crime program for many years in the FBI. We requested in those cases that the jurors' identity be withheld from the defense.
Of course.
So in other words, they did not know the name of the juror or where they lived, so that they could threaten them. And we had that almost standard practice in most of our organized crime cases. Mm-hmm. In the case of this jury, they were not protected. And so their fear was that their identity was known to the public information. And the fear was, if you're a member of that jury and you have strong feelings that, maybe it's not proof beyond a reasonable doubt to find Chauvin guilty, that maybe I want to vote that he's innocent, or a hung jury, or some other reason to not convict him. Mm-hmm. But if they did that, these individuals were worried that somebody in the public domain would come get them, would burn their house down, threaten their family, go after them personally. And that was a huge and legitimate fear. Many felt that the members of that jury had every reason to be afraid if they found Chauvin innocent.
Right. Wow, that's horrible. That's horrible. I know Chauvin has tried to appeal, and he was rejected, and he said he will appeal again. So this is a story to be continued. And see, at least I see that someone wants to kill him, because then he can just stop the appeal. And the story that Chauvin is guilty will continue. So this is a fight between Chauvin and the system.
Right.
So it
exactly
looks
right.
Yeah, it just looks to me Chauvin's very long alone. Does he has anyone help him or stand with him, fight for him, or just by himself?
No, I don't think he's in a position to have his own personal protection while he's in jail. So he's pretty much under the control of the Bureau of Prisons, and where they decide to house him, and under what circumstances, whether it's solitary confinement or in a special wing under protective circumstances, like a witness in an organized crime trial that gets protected even though they're still in jail. So all of those circumstances still apply, and he's on his own, pretty much.
He's on his own. Yeah, that's why so many people are worried about him. I care about him and worry about him. It's not only about his person, life. It's also about the justice.
Right.
He has to fight for himself and for the justice. So we're not saying that he's guilty or not guilty, but he needs to have a fair trial. That's the thing that we really look for. Well, thank you so much for giving us your thoughts and then some information that I feel so sorry for Officer Chauvin for what happened.
At that time of his trial, I was still a cable news consultant, and was describing the fact on one of the cable channels of the motions made by his attorneys, and why I thought they were valid motions to move the trial somewhere else, conceal the identity of the jury from the world, if possible, to protect them.
Reasonable.
And, in other words, the jury that was selected are pretty much residents of Minneapolis. So when their identities are made public, everybody knows, what street they live on, where their house is, where their kids go to school, where their spouses work. All of that information became public. So if his trial had been moved, let's say like McVeigh, if his trial had been moved to Denver, and the jury's identity was protected and they were sequestered, in other words, under confinement basically, and prohibited from watching the news and hearing threats against them, you might have had a different outcome.
Oh, yeah.
But we're not going to know, because those motions made by his defense, which at the time I thought were very appropriate motions that should have been granted to ensure the fairness of the trial, but they weren't. So
you mentioned that some very important information leaked to the public, which should not leak to the public, like the identity of the jurors. But who did that? The court?
Well, there's no real mechanism to protect the identity of the juror if they don't seek a sequestered jury that's anonymous. And in the federal system, the defendants make a motion for that. And in organized crime cases where the defendant is known to be a murderer, for example, that's standard procedure. I ran that organized crime program for many years, oversaw many prosecutions where that's exactly what we ended up with. Back in the day, in the early 90s, you had John Gotti, the leader of the Gambino crime family in New York, and several trials in a row, one in state court and one that was a DEA case, he was acquitted. And it found out later that his henchmen tampered with the jury, found out who they were, threatened them. In one case, by the way, one federal case, a member of the jury contacted the Gambino family, said, "Hey, I'm a jury on this case. Pay me money and I'll help you find him not guilty." So it wasn't just the gangsters that went after the members of the jury. In some cases, one juror went after them.
Right.
Requested the money from them, and Gotti beat those cases. So his nickname at the time, a lot of people were calling him the Teflon Don, like Teflon on a frying pan. Nothing sticks to Gotti.
Oh, I see.
So later, in the final prosecution, which was an FBI case that was successful, the jury was sequestered, the jury was anonymous, and they still had a couple of jurors disqualified. Now, one of the things in the Gotti, in the series of Gotti cases, is that in one case, the case would go to court with 12 jurors and 4 alternates. And in one of the cases, 5 jurors got disqualified for being corrupt or trying to solicit money and all that. So the case, by time they brought in the alternate jurors, but they still went below 12. And so that went to the U.S. Supreme Court because it was a unanimous conviction by 11 jurors in one of the cases. Supreme Court ruled that the Constitution does not specify the number of jurors required in a prosecution like that, only that the decision be unanimous. So the 11-0 conviction stood. But a lot of issues concerning juries and sequestering and anonymity all came up in those trials, and not just Gotti, but a number of the senior La Cosa Nostra leaders in the United States.
Wow. What a story. I like the story that you, when you work in New York and deal with the organization criminal, that's very interesting.
So at that time, I was at FBI headquarters running the organized crime program. So I was not assigned in New York, but I oversaw the organized crime investigations and then the FBI prosecutions of those cases that were being conducted all over the world.
Yeah, that's true. And I remember when we talk about that, I remember some guys went to the judge, what's her name? Amy. She's the judge that appointed by President Trump. And some a group of people went in front of her door, like she just shouted in front of her door, threatening her.
In the case of the jurors, when the decision was pending by the Supreme Court of Roe versus Wade, of whether they were going to throw that out, you had, under federal law, while a Supreme Court case is pending, it's illegal to demonstrate in front of their residents or in any way try to intimidate them. And at that time that was going on, you had the Department of Justice completely ignore the law. Merrick Garland did not prosecute any one of the people on the street that were violating federal law by demonstrating in front of judges' residences. And one person even shows up with a gun with intent to kill a Supreme Court judge. And basically Merrick Garland treats that like no big deal. We don't care.
Merrick Garland is criminal himself. I'm sorry to say that, but I don't know some other words to.
No, I agree. I've spoken many times on my podcast, the Operation Truth podcast, that Merrick Garland is among the many that should be impeached for not doing his duty, violating the Constitution, not enforcing laws that are federal laws. And that applies to Garland, Biden, Vice President Harris, Mayorkas, and the FBI director himself.
Right.
So there are a number of people in Biden himself and the Biden cabinet that just absolutely deliberately don't do their job, don't uphold the Constitution, which they took an oath to do.
Right.
And they don't do it on purpose.
Right.
Whether it's control the borders, the southern border, or issues like this where they should enforce federal law and don't.
Yeah.
Or lie to Congress about it. How many times has Mayorkas testified under oath, the border is secure? Well, it's a complete lie. We know that about 8 million people have illegally come across that border.
He really doesn't care.
No.
Yeah. So that's why 2024, next year, is so important to everyone.
I agree.
Yeah. So thank you so much. And the second topic of today is about the international organization. And I know that you used to be the member of Interpol, not only member, the board member of Interpol.
Yeah, for 20 years, during my time in the running organized crime cases, running the program for 5 years in the late 90s, was involved in working with Interpol on many international investigations. Now, later, I was on the board of directors of Interpol, the executive committee of Interpol. So Interpol consists of, it's more than a 100-year-old organization. It consists of 90 countries who are members of Interpol. And the one issue with Interpol is that they cannot work with information at the top secret level. So much of the information that the FBI gathers in our investigations was unable to be disseminated directly to Interpol, but we did share as much as possible. Now, Interpol, the main purpose of Interpol is to provide a communication network among the members. So you have, out of the 90 countries, the FBI had the largest attaché program of assigning personnel in U.S. embassies around the world. We had, at the time I retired, we were in 76 embassies and consulates, including, Hong Kong, which wasn't a full embassy, Taiwan, other countries like that weren't full countries or full embassies. But, that we had representatives in most of those countries. And our legal attaché program in 76 countries, we had applications pending at the time of my retirement to be opened in 4 more countries. So we end up with 80 right after I'm retired. And the approval process is the FBI, U.S. State Department, Department of Justice, Office of Personnel Management, Office of Management and Budget. All of those have to approve before you actually have the authority to open that office. And then it requires the authority of the host country to approve it. So you supply the host country with, we intend, if with your permission, we want to put X number of agents, analysts, linguists, secretaries in our office, in our embassy or consulate in your country with your permission. And if the country approves it, then we submit the actual names of the individuals that are going to be assigned there so that they can do their own background and vetting to put our people there. And then our employees that are assigned there get diplomatic immunity with that country. So that's the other necessity, is that they have immunity from prosecution in that country. Now, if one of them does something bad, just like if a foreign diplomat in the United States does something bad, then they can be what's called persona non grata, PNG'd out of the country and sent home, but they cannot be prosecuted. So, and we have that type of thing happen all the time. We have, somebody from another country is in the U.S. with diplomatic immunity, and they run over somebody drunk driving and kill them. So in that situation, they have diplomatic immunity. They cannot be prosecuted for drunk driving or for homicide or manslaughter, but they can be removed from the country. So their immunity is revoked and they're sent home, PNG. So that's part of the international rules applying to that. But yes, I ran our international program for 5 years involving our attaches, but also I was elected to the board of directors of Interpol. They call it the executive committee, and we made the rules and met 3, 4, or 5 times a year at various locations, including the main location being Interpol headquarters in Lyon, France. Now, Interpol, as I mentioned, has been operating for 100 years. And in the 20s and 1930s, Interpol headquarters was actually in Vienna. When World War II broke out, Interpol ceased operations for 4 or 5 years. When World War II was over and Interpol was going to resume its operations of being a communication network with the member countries, it was reopened first in Paris for a short time, and then their headquarters was moved to Lyon, France, where it currently is in Lyon.
So it sounds like the Interpol is more a platform for the communication.
Right. It's a network, and it's mainly designed for countries that cannot afford to have an attaché program. So you have the United States, you have Canada, you have the United Kingdom, you have Australia. These countries have one or more attachés in their embassies outside of their country. But none of them, I think the RCMP at the time, when I was running the FBI program with, as I said, just almost 80 offices and about 300 personnel overseas, not counting another 1,000 family members that we had assigned. Countries like Canada, I think, had 30 or 40 attachés. Australia had most of their attachés were in the Asia Pacific region. So you had other countries that had police attachés, law enforcement attachés, Department of Justice in their country, or Ministry of Justice attachés. No other country even came to have half of what the United States had, what the FBI specifically had around the world.
I see. Yeah, that's an interesting experience, huh? And so what we're interesting for the international organization is like we're talking about the Great Reset. We talk about the New World Order, and there are some connection or looks like a connection between the international organizations like UN, WTO, WHO, etc., and the New World Order. Or did you see the organizations, international organizations, has been changed over the years? Do you see any?
Over the years, what's happened? The United Nations was formed shortly after World War II to keep peace and prevent, another world war. For the most part, they've been ineffective. So you have the Security Council, you have other sub-organizations within the UN, but they really, mainly they have a lot of meetings and a lot of talks and discussions, and the actions are few and far between. So there's a lot of, a lot of disrespect for the UN not being able to do anything about the various rogue countries around the world that engage in one activity or another. So that's UN. Now you put in your message to me, IPCO. That's actually the formal letters for Interpol, International Police Organization. So that's the abbreviation of Interpol, IPCO. But again, Interpol, it's a network of countries, and it's mainly designed, countries like the United States then would actually supply help to countries that needed it. So if you had, a relatively poor country, no attachés, a lot of them in Africa, for example, and they're being overrun by organized crime or some other issue, and they put in a request to Interpol to put in a request to the member nations, the 190 countries, who can help us with this? Who could send officers to our country to help us on these issues? And so in that case, the U.S. was often in the situation of supplying assistance to the other countries and supplying a communication network.
Right.
Now, when I first started dealing with Interpol in
Mm-hmm.
the 1960s, 70s, even into the 80s, the
Mm-hmm.
method of communication among the Interpol member countries
Mm-hmm.
was they piggybacked their communications on the worldwide airline reservation system called Sabre. And
Mm-hmm.
so each country then would have to pay a fee, just like now. If you're a travel agent or you're working in a country booking flights, when
Mm-hmm.
you log into that system, you pay by the minute or by the hour to
Mm-hmm.
be in that system.
Mm-hmm.
And the Sabre system charges you a fee
I see.
to communicate with each other. So a lot of poor countries, we would have situations, let's say Sudan
Mm-hmm.
in northern Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Sudan would not have that their terminals
Mm-hmm.
operated 24/7. It's too expensive to be
Mm-hmm.
logged into that system.
Right.
So they might log in for an hour once a week
Mm-hmm.
and hurry up and get their messages sent out and go through the messages that they received, then turn it off until next week.
They can save some money though.
Save money, right? But
Mm-hmm.
you can see where that would hinder any realistic communication.
Sure.
Now, later, while I was working very much with Interpol and out of their headquarters, out of my position in Washington, but working with, and I had people that worked for me assigned at Lyon. So they were assigned full time on the staff at they call it the General Secretariat, which means Interpol headquarters. Mm-hmm. So in that situation, we Interpol and their technicians developed a system where they decided as the internet was becoming more and more popular, what they decided to do was create a secure network of internet communications and a closed system. So what would happen is a country like Sudan could request Interpol headquarters in Lyon, could you give us a password to go into that system? Okay. And then all they would need would be internet access.
Okay.
So if they could pay for their own internet access from their own providers or their own phone company or whoever, use this encrypted login to Interpol, and they could have people staff all the time. That would keep the communication up. So to this day, that secure closed virtual private network, VPN, is still operated by Interpol. And they're not dealing in top secret information. So law enforcement sensitive information is not, it's not going to have the degree of encryption that you might have if they were operating a top secret system, which they are not.
Sure. Yeah, I'm curious about one question. Is I heard some people said that Chinese government used control the Interpol. Is that true?
No, they didn't know. At no time did they control Interpol. What they did after my term expired on the board of directors, or the executive committee is referred to. After a new member of the executive committee was elected from China. And China's a member of Interpol. So their police under the Ministry of Public Security had an Interpol, they have Interpol offices in Beijing. They had one of their officials get elected to be on that board. Now later, and I don't know the details, there was a controversy later involving allegations of corruption that person was no longer on the board and had been removed.
Chairman, used to be a chairman of the board.
Yeah. But I don't know the exact circumstances. I was already out of the board. I was no longer on the board to be aware.
Gao, Gao is his last name. And he's in prison right now, in Chinese prison right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's Interpol's story.
So I don't know what he's accused of doing, what he actually did. And supposedly it involved his wife was also being accused of some level of corruption. But, but again, when you're dealing with the CCP of China, is it a fact that he was corrupt? Maybe, but we don't know. I don't know. I'll put it that way. So I don't know to what degree he was guilty or should be in jail or shouldn't be in jail. He wouldn't be the first person in the CCP to be put in jail improperly or, so I don't know. I'm not saying we don't know. I'm saying I don't know.
And I don't know either. So that's a big secret. But so we talk about Interpol and we talk about the UN. How about the WHO? What do you think about their role?
Well, the WHO, which is part of the UN, it's a subsidiary of the United Nations. And WHO, if you recall, during the pandemic, the accusations against them of just being so corrupt.
Right.
And now you have this pending treaty where World Health Organization can declare in another country a pandemic and start issuing rules and regulations.
Right.
Now, in order for that treaty to take place, the United States Senate has to ratify 2/3 vote of senators to ratify that treaty now is in effect in the United States. So far, it has not been ratified. So, but, you remember at the time, the WHO, basically trying to curry favor with the Chinese government and sent investigators to do Wuhan, and they didn't really investigate. And so you've had all of these accusations against the WHO, which is why at the time the U.S. pulled out. Said, okay, we're not going to be subject to the WHO. Now, Biden may have put that back. I don't know for sure, but yeah, the WHO was totally compromised by the CCP in China.
So yeah, you mentioned very important word is authorization, right? Authority, actually. So these international organization, should not have authority over the countries, but right now looks like they're on the direction of they are like superpower. They can control the countries. Is that a dangerous direction?
If they get that kind of power, absolutely. Absolutely, because these organizations are corrupt and operate in a very corrupt fashion. So the difference is that, to the degree that President Biden curries favor with China and, the World Health Organization and some of these other things, but Biden does not have control over whether the treaty gets ratified that would give World Health Organization that kind of power in the United States to declare a pandemic, to issue orders of lockdowns and other issues like that. So far, they don't have that power. And I don't know. Biden has a year left to try to put in some of his stupid policies, frankly.
And also, I'm curious, who is behind this international organization? We see you have chairman, you have some countries, but who are really behind these organizations?
Well, a lot of the driving force for these organizations is
some foundations
coming out of Davos, people like George Soros backing up these organizations, and World Economic Forum, WEF, and they are pushing the globalist agenda around the world.
Right. So how they don't have the power, the authority to influence these organizations, but they
do if we give it to them.
How can we give it to him?
Well, if we have a weak president decides to just, cede the authority to whether it's World Health Organization or WEF or some of the other globalist organizations. Right now, the U.S. has sovereignty. Well, how long is that going to last? When Biden has no interest in preserving U.S. sovereignty, and he's running for re-election. So if he gets reelected, or if somebody else in the Democratic Party that's a crony of Biden's, they get into power. Yeah, they're trying to bring the U.S. authority and power down. To be a level lower like other countries. Now, for years, they tried to raise other countries up, developing countries in Africa, even considering China a developing country. Bill Clinton saying they're a developing country. Under the World Trade Organization, they should be given special privileges, which they still have. So the question is going to be, are we going to continue down the path which grants
Right.
these countries the authority to bring U.S. authority down. They couldn't bring other countries up. They just couldn't improve their GDP and their production and GNP to match the United States. And the more they tried, the less they accomplished. So now the idea of the guys like George Soros, now he's given power to his son, but organizations sponsored by Soros, sponsored by World Economic Forum, and these other agencies, World Trade Organization, World Health Organization. The idea now is forget about trying to raise up other countries to equal the United States power. Now the answer is let's reduce the U.S.
Right.
And you've got their people doing their bidding, like Biden. Let's open the borders, the southern border, for instance. They would open the northern border, but Canada already has barriers because they don't want everybody pouring into Canada from the United States.
They're smart.
The southern border is wide open. And, the estimate is that about 8 billion people have illegally crossed that border.
Right.
And the Democratic Party under Joe Biden, Mayorkas, all of the leaders are going along with that. That's fine with them to have us be completely weakened. And then if they're not weakened enough, then make sure that all of these 8 million people get money from the U.S. government, get cell phones, get, a variety of privileges that the U.S. citizens don't even have.
Right.
So that's what they've been up to now for 3 years.
Yeah.
And the Democratic Party completely sticks together by, going along with Biden and that whole policy unanimously.
Right. So we see the force is very clear right now. It's George Soros, Davos, Joe Biden, Democrats, of course, Obama, Clinton, these people. Exactly. So I'm just curious. Thank you so much for mentioning George Soros, his name, and Davos. It seems like they're superpower. They can control the Democrats, and in order to control, so they can control the American. And they control.
What's interesting with Soros, by the way, is that his home country is Hungary, and he's banned in Hungary.
Right. They're smart.
They know what he is and what he stands for.
Right.
And the government of Hungary, especially under the leadership of Orban, has been very staunchly controlling their borders.
Right.
These Syrian refugees and others that poured into Germany and into France and into Scandinavia and have completely disrupted those countries.
Right.
Orban and the leadership in Hungary has now consistently said year after year, you're not coming into our country. Right. We don't care. And the EU has threatened them. The United States has threatened them. The United States is tried to interfere with the last presidential election in Hungary and failed. But Orban's popularity in his own country is something like 86% approval by his own citizens. So, and we don't like it. The Biden administration doesn't like it. They want him to toe the line, go along with what the EU says, which is pretty much what the US says, and that he should be obedient, and he's not.
Right.
Now, what I say is good for him.
Yeah, good for him. So, another curious question. Who is behind George Soros and Davos? Is there any one or any organization behind them, or they are the final say?
I think Soros is the multi-billionaire that mainly have created the super PACs and their policies of trying to disrupt, carry out their hatred of the United States in particular. Now, they have initiated a brilliant strategy to bring down the United States. And that was Soros decided, you can't trust congressmen and senators and, other leaders that way. But the cornerstone of maintaining order in the United States is our criminal justice system.
Right.
So he had his super PACs provide money to anybody that would run to be the prosecutor in a county or a city or a state that would not enforce the law, basically. And that's what you have these Soros appointed or elected with his financial backing prosecutors that don't prosecute the law. And you see that in city after city that are being ruined by that policy. The police can't, any arrest they try to make is ineffective because they can't get a prosecution. Then you have these cities coming up with policies where they're going to let the gangster, the criminal, whoever, right back out on the street. So that demoralizes police. Then they have the groups that stand for defunding of the police, which basically means no police. And where is that getting these big cities in the United States? You're seeing a complete deterioration of the fabric of society, the peaceful situation of citizens getting along with other citizens. So it's creating this network of people that hate each other, hate law enforcement, hate the government, and they're succeeding in bringing down the fabric of U.S. society. It was, as I mentioned, a brilliant strategy to start at the prosecutive level and reduce law and order in the United States.
Right. So we can see very clear right now that there are international force trying to destroy America.
Absolutely. This has been a Marxist agenda going back, the history of Marxism. But this goes back more than 100 years in the United States. Where these organizations have tried to do these type of activities and bring down the legitimate or successful organizations within the United States, within the government, within society. So they've tried to take that out. And so far, they're being very successful. And it seems like the American public is kind of have been lulled into sleep by the media. The media has approved this stuff. The media backs it up. The media backs up anything the Democratic Party wants to do. And it's almost like the rest of the population is almost helpless to stop it.
Right. So last question. I'm just curious, what do you think about Davos and Marxism? Are they equal or are they different?
Well, Davos is basically just a good place to put a headquarters based on the Marxist philosophies and strategies to go ahead and implement it at the worldwide level. So in a way, Davos it's like almost saying Washington, D.C. and capitalism. It's a city where the beliefs of the Marxists basically get put into policies or recommendations for policies of the member countries. And if you look at a good example with Davos is they have this program of developing young leaders. And so some of these people started 20 years ago as young leaders. They were 18 years old, 20 years old, and being helped by, other officials from the World Economic Forum, invited to go to Davos and learn, to be interns and all of that. Good example of that would be Justin Trudeau in Canada. But there's other examples of that they were young, World Economic Forum future leaders. Well, it's a Marxist program. And the people that are running it and participating in it are basically Marxists. So there have been a number of good studies of this, of good books of it. Mark Levin has written several books, one of them being American Marxism. His most recent book is Why Do Democrats Hate the United States? So he's had several of these, or The Downfall of the Media. He's had a whole series of books come out. Back during the Reagan administration, he was chief of staff to the Attorney General during Reagan. So now he's on Fox News, and he has a podcast, and he has other shows. He has 2-hour-long shows that go on Fox News Network every Saturday night and Sunday night at 8 p.m. Eastern time. And, he's a very, very qualified spokesperson, and he points out in his books, it's very closely documented. Now, others have written books about the attempt by Marxists to take over our education system, going back 100 years now, going back in those days of what's been going on. So we see that now, and we see the effects of indoctrinating young people to, the effect that that's had on our country.
Right, right. So they have different names, different code, but they're the same thing, the same core is Marxism.
Yes.
And so we have to adjust our point of view about, do we really win the World War II? Do we really win the Cold War?
Well, my belief is that World War II was won by the Soviet Union.
Right.
Because when the war ended, the Western allies really gained no new territory.
Mm-hmm.
Soviet Union, on the other hand, picked up the whole Warsaw Pact or Eastern Bloc countries from Poland, Czechoslovakia at the time, later Czech Republic, Hungary, all of these countries, Croatia, all these countries became part of the Soviet Union. And some of them got their freedom when the Soviet Union collapsed in 91 and 1992. Mm-hmm. Some of them were made to be free countries, like Ukraine.
Right.
And some of them were not. So, in Chechnya, for example, was not allowed to become a free country. Mm-hmm. It remained a province of Russia now, following the Soviet Union, because they had a lot of minerals in the ground. So it was potentially a wealthy country. Right. But, many of the other countries, they were on their own for a long time before they finally broke away completely from Soviet domination.
And also about 1990s, when the Soviet Union collapsed, lots of people think that we win, that communist is gone, Marxism is gone. It is not.
It's not, but within the Soviet Union, a completely Marxist country going back to Lenin and Stalin in 1917, the Bolshevik Revolution and all of that. When the Soviet Union collapses, the Soviet Union and becomes Russia, the Russian Federation, mm-hmm. they go back to being much of the culture that existed during the time of the czars in mm-hmm. Russia. Mm-hmm. So they went back to being a Christian Orthodox country, which was forbidden under the Soviet Union mm-hmm. to be Christian. Right. They went back to trying to, get along with, they wanted to dominate as much as possible, but they also went along with trying to cooperate and have business partners with other countries in Europe. Mm-hmm. So a lot of what's been said about the Russians still being communist, still being Marxist and all of that, really not true.
I agree. Actually, I have a very good friend who's living in Moscow. We just have a talk last night, and he just mentioned about that. So many people misunderstand that they still think today's Russia equals Soviet Union, which is not. And he told me that Russian people really hate the part of the history of their own nation. They hate the Soviet Union. They hate the Marxism. They hate the communist. They don't even want to talk about that.
Yeah, much like Germany is regarding their history of being a Nazi country. So, right. Yeah, you do have countries that hate their own past and want to eliminate references to it.
Right. Well, thank you so much. I think I have a lot of intake from the dialogue that you provide to us. And also, thank you for connect the Davos and the Marxism, because Davos is more like, oh, this is so good. So many people think Davos present some good things to the countries, to the world, but actually it is not.
No, Davos is just a venue in the mountains of Switzerland. So It's not in and of itself.
Right.
It's not running the world like they want to. Now they want the World Economic Forum mm-hmm. to become globalist, to have the rest of the countries of the world fall under the domination of these globalists that want that. And we have plenty of people in our own country that advocate for globalism. Go back to Obama, even in recent times. Obama. And many of the people of the Obama administration in leadership positions then mm-hmm. are in leadership positions under Biden. That's why, many people refer to the Biden administration as Obama 2.0.
Right, exactly.
And that's true. So guys like Blinken
Mm-hmm.
and Jake Sullivan, National
Solomon,
Security
right,
Director, all of these guys were senior officials under Obama.
right, right, right. So what we can do as normal people, like American citizens, we need to wake up. We need to know what really happened around the world. I always believe that Americans matter. It's pretty much equals the world matter. It's not only the American because Americans so important to the whole world. So when you realize what's going on in the world, we realize what's going on in America.
Well, sometimes, but the
Mhm.
media now is trying to hide most of what's going on in the rest of the world.
Right, right,
Like they're hiding in Ukraine, what's going on in the Ukraine.
right.
And is a good
That's
example. And
yeah,
now Israel, now, so they're not reliable. And the problem is that to be a successful democracy, you need an informed public,
sure.
but they have to be informed with the truth. And
Right,
that's what's missing now, is that much of the public is not getting factual information, or if they get it, they don't believe it.
right,
Well, we're not that's not true. That's fake news, or that's, you know, whatever theory,
right.
you know.
Whatever theory. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I I just
so it
wonder how this mainstream media can face the reality, the truth. And one day, the truth always will come out one day, how they face the truth.
well, you hope it comes out. But right now, even when the truth comes out to some extent, a lot of it's ignored or not believed, or the people that are against the truth and want to maintain power debunk it. They come up with reasons why, oh, that's not true. You're seeing this, for example,
Mhm.
the Biden corruption investigation is one of the most extensive corruption
Yeah,
investigations ever in U.S. government history,
yeah,
with the wrongdoing of the Biden crime family
right.
under the direction of Joe Biden
Yeah,
is just well documented beyond belief. They've got the bank records of the
right,
transfers, they've got the deals, they've
right,
got all of the trips to China and
right,
Romania and Ukraine and all of that. And yet, you have the Republicans are reluctant to bring articles of impeachment
right.
because the Democrats in the Senate are saying, we're going to stand with Joe Biden, every one of us. And
No matter what he
articles of
wants.
impeachment,
Hmm.
under a U.S. Constitution, the House of Representatives brings the charges. So it's like an indictment. They
Hmm.
bring impeachment charges.
Hmm.
Once that's filed, then the impeachment trial is held in the U.S. Senate, and the
Hmm.
U.S. senators are the jurors. Now, to convict, we have 100 senators to
Right.
convict anybody in impeachment. And you just saw this with the two impeachments of Trump. It
Hmm.
takes 67 senators.
Hmm.
So even if they get 100% of the Democrats, they still need 17 senators, Republicans, to go along with them. And
Hmm.
so right now, the House Republicans recognize that they're not going to get 67 votes in the U.S. Senate to convict Biden at the moment. So what will it take? How much proof do the others need, the jurors, which would be the Senate? How much proof do they need that the Bidens have taken in tens of millions of dollars from the CCP, from Romania, Ukraine,
Hmm.
Russia, other countries?
Right.
You know, what's it going to take for them to believe? The investigators, in a short time since last January, have come up with the bank records of the transactions, the
Hmm.
deposits, the transfers, the LLCs, the 20 LLCs created by the
Hmm.
Biden family to hide their money laundering and transferring.
Right.
Um,
This
and
is
yet, here we go. They have fear of trying to impeach him, that they won't be able to get enough votes.
that is so sad.
It's very sad.
That is very sad. But we as a people, we will not allow this happen. We will have to stand up and just say, stop it. Enough is enough. We need to take this country back.
Agree.
Yeah.
Agree.
Thank you so very much. And
Well,
every
we're all
time,
we're all doing our part to spread the word. and
Exactly.
hope that at some point people believe it. Enough people believe this
Right.
that we need to take the country back.
Right. Right. Well, thank you so very much again, and I really appreciate your encouragement to saying the truth. And also, Tom has a very good show called Operation Truth. And I know that a lot of our audience go to see your shows and they like it. It's very informative, and then it's truth. So we just,
It's very important because we're worried that some of the platforms that you're familiar with might be shadow banning, might be lying about how many viewers, subscribers, and how many likes and all of that. So it's not the only, the show is also on TikTok and Apple Podcast. What
well,
else? Several podcast shows like that.
and
And
right,
yeah, and we need the viewers to
sure,
line up and at least spread the word that we are on this show, putting out the truth, putting
sure.
out that you can come to this show as long as the authorities like Google and YouTube allow it to be on their platforms. But we're on several platforms, and hopefully that will continue.
Sure. Well, thank you so very much again, and then thank you for our audience. We have some audience, and then they have some feedback. I just say thank you, well said, and then really appreciate Tom for your time and your encouragement.
Yeah, when the show is over and you publish it, I know you're streaming it also, but
Yeah.
I do afterward look at the comments. I want to see how many people are watching and what comments they're making or what questions they may still have that we can bring up next week to
Yeah, right.
answer the questions.
Right.
So
For last week, I think, hold on one second, if you may. Let me check out. There is a question that one of the audience asked. So I promise that I will bring to you next time. All right. I think the question is, oh, one of the audience talked about the military court. He said when our civil court doesn't work right now. Is there anything that the military court can do?
well, the courts for military justice require that the defendants have to be somebody in the military. It has to have a military nexus. So it's not
Okay.
private citizens being tried in U.S. military courts.
Okay.
And there's a whole code of military justice
Sure.
and the way the attorneys go, and that you're entitled to lawyers, much similar to the civil courts or the
Okay.
civilian courts, if you will, that the defendant is entitled to legal representation, and many of the rules, most of the rules that apply in one court apply in all the courts, because the Supreme Court has ruled this is what fair procedures are,
Right.
or the right of the defendant to be represented by an attorney, to be told what their rights are. All of those issues are prevalent in all the courts. The Supreme Court is overseeing all of the justice systems,
Sure.
but the military court is designed for the military generally.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you so much for the answer. All right. So our time's up, and again, thank you, and I'll see you sometime next week.
Perfect. See you next week.
Thank you so much, and Merry Christmas.
Thank you, Cheyenne.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Oh, could you hang on 1 second after you stop recording?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
I just want